And we're live. Hi, everybody. This is Lauren Baker, founder of Search Engine Journal, and welcome to today's episode of the Search Engine Journal Show. With me today, I have an old friend who I've worked with quite a bit over the years and known for over a decade, Joe Hall of Hall Analysis. Hey, Joe, how's it going?
Hey Lauren, good to see you. And you're right, it has been over a decade.
I
I
know.
didn't even think about that. When I first met you, you were Search Engine Journal, and that was it. And now you have your own internet talk show.
I
Uh,
do.
and I am a guest on it, which is crazy. It's a pleasure to be here. And I really look forward to our talk today.
It's a pleasure to have you, Joe. It's a pleasure to have you. And it has been over a decade. I think, ironically, I think I first met you when I used to have with Dave and Jordan, we had a site
Yeah.
called I Am Broadcast, which was a video, which was an
Oh,
internet
yeah.
marketing broadcast, internet marketing videos.
I forgot about that. That was really
Yeah,
cool. Yeah,
yeah,
it was
like
like
12 years ago.
YouTube. It was like YouTube for internet marketing,
Yeah,
sort of.
YouTube
Yeah,
won. YouTube won though.
yeah. YouTube won, but that was a really cool thing. I completely forgot about that. Yeah, that was
Cool.
neat.
Speaking of YouTube, if you're currently watching today's show, feel free to like and ring the bell to subscribe. Ring that bell down below. And also, today's show is brought to you by our good friends at Ahrefs. Um, Ahrefs have a T-shirt and a sponsored by thing there. Joe, you ever use Ahrefs?
I have used it. Yeah, I have I have all three of my main websites tied in to their verified, site verified accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, it's great. It's a great tool, great set of tools. You know, I like it.
Awesome.
I'm
Awesome.
impressed with what they've done. Because I know they started off with primarily, I think, link data, and then I think they've gotten much more into everything else, and so that's been real impressive to watch that growth into those other areas.
It has been impressive, not just with them, but other SEO suites, right? Everyone starts
Yeah.
out with one specific offering, and then as they
Yep.
grow,
Yep.
it used to be a lot of them had their own strengths and weaknesses, right?
Yeah.
Like I like Moz's Mozscape, but
Uh huh.
and I like Ahrefs from a link perspective, and then also I think the crawl information is really cool. It's up there with a
Yeah.
lot of
It
the
is.
enterprise crawl tools.
It is. Yeah.
Um, and then SEMrush, I've always liked them from a rankings tracking perspective, right? But it seems like over time, a lot of them have gotten to be almost equal level in terms of being able to offer a lot underneath one
They
account.
really had. They really had. And I remember back in the day when I first got started with SEO, the only place you could get link data was Yahoo.
Oh yeah,
Yahoo.
Site Explorer,
Yeah,
Link
Yahoo had a
Explorer,
Site
Site. Yeah.
Explorer, and I remember when Yahoo shut down Site Explorer, um, people were talking about Majestic, and then
Oh
started
gosh.
Raven started their stuff, and I mean that was a really weird time in SEO because a lot of folks only had like two tool suites to choose from, and now it seems like there's like a new SEO tool suite every year, coming out. Um, and they all, like you said, they've all gotten really good, and they all kind of match competitively as far as their offerings. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, it is cool. It is cool. And speaking of SEO tool suites and site crawls, I want to talk a little bit about SEO audits today. But first, tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Joe Hall. I am a technical SEO. Prior to going headfirst into SEO, I was a web developer, um, and I got into SEO from a professional standpoint by doing web development for other SEOs, and so I really learned the technical side of SEO by writing code and stuff like that for SEOs. And I realized, like back then, and this is I think around the time that I met you, Lauren, I realized I was like, oh my god, these SEOs are making so much more money than I am. Um, And so I was like, forget this code business, um, or at least forget doing it professionally, and so I got into technical SEO consulting, and have been at it ever since. It's been about 11 or 12 years, I think. And it's been a huge life change. I mean, I didn't really think back then when I was building websites that I would go into this level or to this part of a career, or that I could even build a career out of this. But it just kind of happened, and I'm kind of like a little bit. I'm a little bit like I have a little bit of regrets that I didn't take that part of my career more seriously when I was getting into it, because I thought it was just something I could offer on the side of my web development, services. But if I would have known that I would have gotten into it this deep back then I think that I would have structured things a little bit differently. But I'm really happy with where we're at now, and I have a consultancy that focuses on uh, larger companies, mid-level corporations, and enterprise brands for technical SEO, and try to combine both worlds of development and tech, and SEO together.
That works really well with what we're going to talk about today because, I know that you do a lot of SEO audits,
I do.
things like that. And really, to me, if I ask 10 different people for an SEO audit, I'm going to get 10 different things, right?
Yeah.
One, from an expectation perspective, right? Because what is an SEO audit? Is it a crawl report?
Yeah.
There's only so much information you can find with a crawler. Are you using front end browser reporting, Chrome Dev Tools? Are you using anything in the back end? Like how is that done? And then also, a lot of some SEO audits have a content perspective component. Some, recently we just finished an SEO audit, and we ended up not only providing the audit but providing all of the I guess it's a Jira commands or whatever,
Yeah.
to give to the dev team to
Yeah.
kind of make that progression easier, to make sure they can just copy and paste and just utilize that, right? So
Yeah.
just wanted to kind of get an idea, especially talking to you, because it sounds like you're pretty even keeled between technical SEO and developing. Do you end up making some of the changes with client sites or sites that you work with that you recommend, or do you typically leave it up to dev, or does it matter based upon?
It really just depends on the client. If it's a smaller business that doesn't have in-house resources, then if they need help implementing the audit, then I can offer that as a service after the audit is completed. But most of my clients, though, they have their own dev teams, and they have their own people that would be able to implement, and they would actually prefer that they do it, and I would prefer they do it too, because they're the ones that know the systems. They're the ones that have to maintain any changes that are added. And I usually end up working with those people, as a consultant to them. So, end up interfacing with them quite a bit after the audit is over to help, walk them through the next steps to implementation. And I think that a good SEO audit, or even a good consultant, needs to recognize their limitations, and I try to write my audits where they are technology. They're very technical, but I try to stay technology agnostic within implementation, because I don't want to make any assumptions about how their dev team does their job or does their work. And so I don't go in and give them tons of code samples. I do give them, code at the markup level, because HTML is HTML. It's pretty much implemented, the same everywhere. But I'm not going to go in and tell them, oh, I see you're using, this Ruby on Rails, system. Here's how you need to, make these changes based on that kind of thing. That's really up to them to decide, as long as you give the client the technical specifications on the high level, with HTML or with things like your HTTP status codes and the way the server should respond, those types of things. I mean, that's kind of where you need to be at. And I think the most of the devs appreciate that more because you're not coming in and telling them, hey, like, I'm going to micromanage your implementation of this, that kind of thing. You just kind of tell them this is what needs to happen. However you can make that happen, go for it. That kind of thing. But yeah, you mentioned earlier, Lauren, about how like you can ask like 10 different SEOs, like, to get an audit, and you'll get back 10 different things, And I think that, yeah, and so I think that kind of goes back to the fact that there's lots of different ways you can do an SEO audit, and there's lots of different types of SEO audits. If you are an SEO consultant or an agency, then I think the best thing to do is to listen very closely to your client very early on to hear what their needs are and to hear where they want to focus the attention. There's always going to be things that you need to check for every audit, but some clients are going to really want more of a content analysis. Some are going to want more of just a technical analysis. Some clients have specific questions that you're going to want to include in the audit or specific areas of concern. So you really need to focus with your client on what their specific needs are and build an audit product around what those needs are. And I think that's really important to do. I don't think a lot of SEOs really think of it that way. They just have like a checklist or an idea of what an audit is in their head, and then they just execute the same kind of methodology for every client. And that's fine to a certain extent, but really to give value to the audit process, you should really understand what your client's unique needs are. And if you are a business owner that wants to get an SEO audit, be mindful of that when you talk to SEOs. Like, is this person listening to me? Is this person asking me the right questions for them to address my specific needs? And if they're not, then maybe second guess what their process and think about looking for someone else, maybe.
So it's really interesting. It sounds like a lot of the times you're customizing the audit based upon the specific project, as opposed to templated or boilerplated. Oh, this is the project. Well, I'm going to do this audit the same way I do everything else because that's going to help me scale. Right?
Yeah,
Whereas
absolutely.
it's more so consulting. You're more so doing, like, I think that's a difference too, is that one is more so like a health check, where the other one is kind of more of a customized consulting style audit. You're spending the time to go through
Exactly. Yeah,
their
exactly.
issues.
And to be honest with you, we just talked about tools a little earlier. A lot of the tools out there can do a health check for you. A lot of the tools have their own like auditor or their own like site crawler that can do a good health check for you. But the truth is that most websites are built uniquely and differently, and there's no way that a lot of those tools can anticipate the unique elements of a website. And so a human auditor can go in and can actually look at things, and where a tool might say, oh, well, this, it looks fine, this element of SEO looks fine, but a human being can look at it and say, well, no, that's not fine because, I can see this, this, and this, and that's a different level, I think, of like the health check versus the consulting, product or whatever,
Or the reasons things are set up, right?
Yeah, exactly. The reasons why it's happening or whatever. I mean, another thing too that I like to think about, and I actually mention this in my audits a lot, is there's a difference between what I call tactical recommendations and strategic recommendations. And so like tactical recommendations are like best practices. You're focusing on like the things that every SEO would probably agree on, diversifying title tags, that kind of thing, using the right heading tags, that sort of thing. But a more strategic recommendation will be things like you need to develop a better internal linking structure for this section. of the site, or you need to focus on creating bigger pieces of content in this topic area or something like that. And this is more of a strategic mindset versus like just a best practices or tactical kind of mindset. And my audits kind of focus on both, I think. I try to focus on the best of both. Try to have like a lot of tactical best practices, but then also strategic things. And I think that's what separates a lot of most audits from good audits and bad audits is if there's a strategic element in there that can help drive the client past just the best practices,
Excellent. So one thing that you said is a lot of the different tool companies out there can give you kind of a head start to do a health check on your site. I'm going to do a little sponsored message right here. I highly recommend checking out Ahrefs Webmaster Tools. It's free. Oh, look at that! That ticker popped up at right when that perfect timing, Christina. Thank you. So, Ahrefs Webmaster Tools is a free tool by Ahrefs. You can go to ahrefs.com/AWT. I also just dropped the link here in the comments as well. And as a reminder to anyone who's watching live today, go ahead and ask some questions. We've had a couple come through, but before we get started with some of the viewer mail or viewer questions, so to speak, I do have a question for you in terms of, hey, you've gone through, you've utilized your brain power, your experience in the field, your tool sets, your strategic thinking, both sides, your left side, right side of your brain, everything else to go through and compile an audit for a client. Okay, I have this audit. Here it is. Here's a stack of papers, boom, on the desk. What are the next steps? And what is a good strategy to get clients to execute on an SEO audit? And to add to that question, do you feel that your background in development gives you a little bit more cred and ability to do so with speaking with developers or speaking with stakeholders and things like that along those lines?
Yeah, I think it does to a certain extent, especially when I talk to the developers. It's really, sometimes I listen to other SEOs talk about technical SEO and I just kind of cringe a little bit because of what they say. And I'm worried, like, oh my God, I hope I never say that to a PHP developer, that kind of thing. So I think it does help. I do have a background in development because it does help me kind of speak their same language. And I don't know if it really helps me convince them to do the audit. I think what really convinces clients is, and this is kind of, you have to kind of like do this strategically as a consultant or as an agency, is to create a narrative within the audit itself, or create some sort of story that you're telling. Because there's two objectives when you're doing an audit or when you're presenting an audit. You have to, one, help the client or the business owner understand what's in the audit, what everything means. I mean, you also have to help them basically do what you're recommending. You have to convince them to do what you're recommending and to understand what's in the audit. And so the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to tell a story. And the narrative is all about the narrative of how the audit's put together. The narrative needs to be that these are problems on your site. This is the impact of those problems, when it can be like with traffic or conversions or anything like that. And then this is how we fix those problems. And every recommendation on the audit then goes back to fixing those problems that you mentioned in the beginning. And it even gets even easier to make all this make sense if you only really talk about the top maybe 3 issues the audit kind of drives that. So I call these my top takeaways, and I say, look, these are your biggest issues that your site is facing for SEO, and we're going to talk about how to fix those. And everything in the audit that is mentioned after that should be some way connected to those top 3 takeaways. Now, that doesn't mean that we're only going to talk about specific things in the audit, we're going to talk about everything, best practices and everything else. But by trying to connect the dots between those best practices and those three, problems or takeaways in the beginning, you set up sort of a mission for them, for them to fix these problems. And the way you fix these problems is these list of recommendations. And I think that helps convince businesses and decision makers that they need to execute the audit versus just coming to them and saying, here's 30 things you need to do to have good SEO. Like if that's your narrative, then it's not going to get anywhere because it just looks like busy work. It just looks like more work that they have to spend money on, and you haven't really drawn a connection to how it's going to help them. So I think that really getting your clients to execute on the audit really comes down to how the audit is structured, how you present it, if you have a narrative that's associated with every aspect of the audit, going back to main themes, and then that helps the client understand, okay, I need to do these things because of these three things. And if those three things that you mentioned, those top takeaways, if they're at all related to any problems they brought to the table, then that's even a bigger winner. If the client comes to you and says, hey, this section of the site is not ranking at all, can you tell us why? Well, if the audit I give them lists one of those as the top takeaways, and when I give them 15 reasons why it's not ranking and how to fix those, they're going to act on those immediately, because they've come to you with that. They've come to you with that problem. So I think it all comes down to developing a narrative within the audit, and then letting all of the recommendations and content in the audit all point back to that narrative and to those three, areas that they need to focus on. And I say three, it can be as many, top takeaways as you want. I don't want to get too deep into that because I don't want them to be overstimulated with a bunch of problems in the beginning. I like three because three kind of focuses on the top three things they need to look at. And then everything else kind of goes back to those three things, basically,
I love that approach for a couple of reasons. One, like when we started doing SEJ conferences, we ended up we ended up theming them as like three takeaways. Like what are the three most important takeaways you're going to get from each presentation? And we set up that expectation that there's going to be three. Here's what they are. We're going to review this at the end, and that way, people aren't drinking from the fire hose, so to speak. You're not leaving something with like pages and pages and pages of information, but it's more so three things that are going to make a difference, right? And then also that helps to communicate the wins internally, and something like that bubbles up, right? Like if I'm like, you got to fix all of this because your SEO sucks, and we're going to make your SEO better. That's not a tangible solution, right?
It's not. No. Yeah. And so distilling the audit down into a tangible solution, like you said, is the way to get them to execute it. And and I think also, unfortunately, there are some in-house SEOs, and I'm not talking about anyone specific. I'm just talking about how the SEO kind of world works. There are some businesses, not in-house SEOs, but there are some companies that are not actually looking for an audit. What they're looking for is just a document that they can show someone that they've done due diligence. And in that situation, they don't want those top takeaways. They just want some phone book worth of consulting deliverable that they can take to someone else and show that, hey, look, we did this, that kind of thing. And that's a little discouraging because they never intended to actually execute the audit, and so that's why I said earlier on, you need to really talk to your client about what they want, and talk to them early on about what type of audit they're looking for, and if they have any unique issues or problems, and then deliver that to them. I'll pretty much do anything for a client, I'm that kind of guy, but truthfully, I'm really motivated by the clients that want to succeed. and I'm motivated by the clients that want to execute things and want to fix problems and are not scared to get their hands dirty and are not just looking for a deliverable that they can hand up the chain of command. That those are the clients that I really love working with. And those are the audits that I think have the most value to build an audit for that.
Because you want to build something and you want to see
Yeah,
something that you've spent time on, not only making sure you get paid, but
yeah,
making sure that like you're actually contributing to making people's lives easier,
yeah.
helping businesses grow, contributing to society. Like
So
it
here's
is a good
something,
feeling.
and here's another thing too, is like when I first got started in this business as a solo consultant, my thought process from to market myself and to market my business was like attempting like word of mouth marketing. Like I wanted people in the industry to like recommend me to other people and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And that has been great. But now my focus is not really people in the industry anymore. Even though I never turned down a referral. But my main focus now is I want the folks at my client companies to be the ones that are referring to me. I
Yeah.
would rather have marketing managers or in-house SEOs or CMOs or CEOs talk about me versus my SEO friends, which I love all of you, but still, I would rather have my clients refer me and kind of build that. And so the reason I'm saying this is because that's kind of changed the way that I do business and changed the way that I kind of structure the engagement because every deliverable I work on and every audit I do has that level of investment in it. Is that I'm looking to bridge the gap between this project and the next one, and the only way I can do that is if I provide value. I want this audit to be successful. I want it to provide value for the company so that, in a year when the CEO is talking to some other CEO and they're asking about SEO and they say, oh, well, we know a great guy that you can talk to, that's
Yeah.
that's where I'm at here. And I think that the for me, my marketing is in the product and in the results that product gets to the client. That helps me drive the business more than anything else.
I like that. It's a very solid approach. It's a very
Yeah.
solid approach. Speaking of word of mouth, we do have some comments and some questions that
Okay.
have popped up. I'm
Okay.
gonna start with one here. Let's see how this goes on the screen. Vivek asks, he's just redirected almost 400 to 450 URLs of his news website. Is there any issue that he may face or that Vivek may face in doing so? So, what are your thoughts after doing that many redirects? Of course, we don't have much background on this,
Yeah.
so
So there's a lot of info that we're missing here. But I think that it says it's a new website. So if it's a new website that hasn't gotten a lot of traction yet with SEO or hasn't gotten a lot of rankings or traffic yet, then you probably don't have a whole lot to lose. And that's a good thing. I do a lot of migration work, a lot of redirection and migration strategy work. And we always approach this type of thing from a risk mitigation standpoint and looking at, will this change affect your current rankings? Is there potential for traffic loss, that kind of thing? And so I'm not sure, where this person redirected those URLs to, but as long as they have redirected them with a one-to-one redirection using a server-side 301 redirection status code, um, and they've taken into account like where that new content or where the new location from the content will be, then it should be following SEO best practices. Another thing too you have to ask is what was the intent of the redirection? I always try to get at that,
right.
because if the intent is to consolidate a website or if the intent is just to move content, then that's all above board. If the intent was to refocus, 10 million links that you purchased from a spam network, that's probably a problem. And so, yeah, the risk level is higher in that regard. So the intention is always something you need to think about. Always stick with best practices for redirection. And like I said, if it's a new website, like I think they mentioned, then it's probably not a huge concern. And also, any mistake you make with redirection, it can be dicey for a while, but if you continue your marketing efforts and you continue SEO efforts and you continue fresh link building, you can come out from under it in the long run. So just focus on that,
I agree. And another thing too is that it's very easy sometimes to utilize redirections in the back end as a band-aid, but forget about updating the front end from a discoverability standpoint.
Yeah,
right?
definitely, yeah.
So what you don't want to do is a lot of redirects on your site of pages that you've internally linked to, and therefore it's okay if Google finds a link which redirects on a third party back to your site, right? Because you have very limited control of that. But you want to make sure your navigation links are updated, your internal links are updated, everything with that final destination URL, right?
Yeah, you're updating your internal links is crucial as well,
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. The redirecting links stuff reminds me, like, quote unquote, back in the day, used to have a clams casino recipe site that we built that had clams casino recipes. And got a bunch of links pointing to it from other recipe sites, and then redirected the whole thing over to a casino client. So the idea was the inbound link equity all had the word casino in it. It had clams in front of that, but it had casino. And then we built all the links to the clams casino recipe and then site, and then redirected it all over.
I think I remember another similar project working on with you and Dave Snyder a long time ago. Similar strategy, not recipe oriented, but yeah, that used to be a popular link building method. And I think that I don't know if it still works or not, to be honest with you, because
I don't know.
I have seen some notable SEOs in the last couple of years buy up old marketing domains and redirect them to their sites. And they are doing very well now in the rankings. So I don't know if that's actually if that still works or not.
I think it does, but it depends on the relevancy more so than it used to.
Yeah,
right?
I think it probably depends on the relevancy, and I think it also depends on the quality of the site that you're redirecting in. If it's a really good site and had really amazing links pointed at it originally, then yeah, you can't deny that that's going to be carry over authority in some way. Yeah.
Another thing too that I would add to the migration scenario is the first step is redirecting A to B from a migration standpoint. But what I've found to be even more important is looking at historic redirects that they've had in the past, right? 10 years ago, did they decide to redirect go from a .html to a Shopify or PHP powered site and redirect all the HTMLs to PHP? And then after that, they decided to launch something on change their URL structure. So then they redirected all the PHPs to the new URL structure.
Yeah.
But those HTML redirects go through hops, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe one day someone in development was like, hey, we did these redirects a year ago. Let's turn them off.
Yeah.
Google's caught up by now. No, it's not the case. It's not the case. It's never the case.
So and that's really good. And that's why I think that if you're going to do a redirection plan, you need to use at least 3 or 4 different data sources. So I know a big mistake that I've seen a lot with redirections is the dev team will just pull down a landing page report from Google Analytics and say, oh, this is it. These are the only URLs we're going to redirect. And the truth is that just because, a page has received traffic, those are not the only pages you need to redirect. You need to redirect all the links that are coming into the site, all the legacy redirects that are currently existing, and make sure they're all one-to-one, like you said. So I encourage folks to use more than one data set, not just, information from Google Search Console or Google Analytics or something like that. Pull multiple different sources of target URLs for backlinks from different backlink provided, sites, and map the redirects and all that stuff as well. Redirection, content migration and redirection strategies, they can be a very time-consuming and tedious strategy and process. So I wouldn't encourage anyone to do this on a whim. You have to really take the time to go through it and really focus and make sure all your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted.
Awesome. So we have some more questions in the comments. I highly encourage anyone that's viewing right now to ask more questions. We have about 10 minutes left in the show. You good for about 10 more minutes, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. I just looked at the clock. Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Let's do it.
But in the meantime, Christina, let's see if you can. Christina's going to run an ad roll.
Today's episode of the Search Engine Journal Show is brought to you by our good friends at Ahrefs. And today I'd like to tell you a little bit about Ahrefs Webmaster Tools. Ahrefs Webmaster Tools is a free resource. Again, that's free. You don't even need a credit card to sign up, where you can monitor your SEO site health, know your backlinks, not just check your backlinks, but know your backlinks, then also see keywords that are bringing you traffic to your site. This gives you a better understanding of your website's SEO potential with the help of actionable SEO metrics, such as search volume, keyword difficulty, and traffic value. Just go to ahrefs.com. Again, it's ahrefs.com/AWT to give Ahrefs Webmaster Tools a spin. Again, just go to ahrefs.com/AWT to check out Ahrefs Webmaster Tools for free. Thank you so much, and back to our show.
Hey, how'd you like that?
I was not expecting it would be you giving the commercial, so that's cool.
So we're big advocates of the division of church and state when it comes to advertising here. Obviously, I would never mix sponsorships with editorial.
Of course, yeah, of course. Who would? Who would do that?
This coffee tastes so good coming from this Ahrefs mug. It's so much better than regular mugs around the house. I don't know why. So speaking of mugs, we have some folks here that have asked some questions. I don't know where that transition came from. Sharif asks, well, he comments, but I'm going to ask you, how important are Ahrefs Langs at the end of the day when it comes to a site audit? And do you need Ahrefs Langs if your site is not in multiple languages or targeted towards multiple different countries?
This issue just came up in an audit I did this week, and it became a very hot topic within the audit review session. It's important if you have multiple languages of the same content, or even multiple language and geographic location for the same content. It's incredibly important. I do not think it is important or required if you are not having multiple versions of the page. I think you can just stick with just the default the href lang tag default for that page. I believe, and again, like this brings up a good point. That modern SEO is now kind of like segmented into different practice areas, and some SEOs specialize in certain areas, and some SEOs specialize in other certain areas. And what we're talking about here is usually considered international SEO, kind of like SEO for websites that are international and want to attract customer base from all over the world in different geographic locations and languages, that kind of thing. I don't do a ton of international SEO only because most of my clients don't need that level of focus. I have done more with them in the last couple of years. So I have become more familiar with the HF Lang tag. but like I said, I'm pretty certain that, you would really only need it if you're using multiple versions of the same content in different language or in a different geographic setting, Yeah.
Yeah, or even products, right? If you have different currencies,
Yeah.
maybe between the U.S. and Canada or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, next question is a really important one as well. Angie Nikolachek asks, there's still no plants on your shelves, Joe. What's going on?
Yes. Angie actually gave me a recommendation the other day for some, I think she said sci-fi related things or whatnot. I got this new office and there's like a ton of built-in bookshelves and all of my books are on Kindle. So now I have a bunch of empty bookshelves that I need to put something in. I actually am not a huge fan of houseplants because I have to take care of them. And I don't want to do that, you know. I have considered getting some fake plants instead. So maybe I'll get some fake plants in here just to make it look a little bit more greener. But I'm not really interested in taking care of any living things other than myself sometimes,
Cacti would be good. Get some cactuses around
Yeah.
there. Just don't want to run into them. And I'm pretty good at taking care of orchids because I think I just got to drop an ice cube in there like every month or
Yeah.
something.
Orchids are difficult though. Orchids are finicky from what I've heard.
They can be.
But
They can
yeah,
be.
I guess the ice cube deal though is pretty low maintenance, Yeah.
Just pour my cup in there when I'm done.
Your coffee.
Okay, Michael Fortin asks, Joe, he corrected it afterward. They didn't mean to call you Joey.
That's okay.
What are your thoughts on the summer of core updates? Do you think a content audit is warranted? I'm not sure where the content audit component, I don't think that's attached to the summer of core updates. So let's take this one step at a time. It's been a busy summer, man. Like Google's like, we're going to split our core updates between 2 months. And then, oh, by the way, we're dropping a bunch of updates in between, right?
Yeah, it's
How's
been
it
a
been?
lot. It's been a lot of stuff. So it's been confusing for a lot of my traffic analysis that I've done with audits in the summer. I keep asking myself, are they being hit by an update or not? That kind of thing. I think that, I don't know, man. I think that sometimes I just think, well, Google can't be scheduling these things like this on purpose. Like, obviously, they're not here to irritate us. But I do kind of wonder if, well, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I don't understand why they would split up so many updates like this in the same time period that they were rolling out the Core Web Vitals update for this summer, and then going back multiple times to saying, oh, well, Core Web Vitals is not going to be as bad as you thought, But by the way, here are a handful of core algorithm updates that we're going to split up into multiple runs. I mean, it's almost like it's kind of like if we do see a drop in traffic, which I did see this last week for a client, I have no idea what's causing it, and so I have to go back to, well, what are the most likely concerns and causes for a core quality update, drop, because this particular client had excellent core web vitals, but they had a lot of patterns that would indicate something like a core quality issue with content. And so, it's kind of one of those things where you're like, well, I don't really know what's affecting them because there's so many things going on right now with the algorithms, and I guess I'm just ranting right now. This isn't really helpful for anyone. But to get back to what you're talking about, I think that as far as doing an audit is concerned, right now, in relation to these updates. I think that if you think you're being targeted by one of the algorithm updates, or if you have been impacted in any way, maybe it's just because other sites around you and the results have done better and pushed you down. If you've been impacted in any way, I think it's worth looking at getting some sort of audit done, and to be specific with the SEO that you work with of what your concerns are, and if they can look into understanding more about what's happening within the traffic. As far as like actually what's happening like with these updates, I really do not like to be one of those people that like, glues into the updates and, tries to understand every little nuance of the algorithm. I think though that the core algorithm updates specifically have been focused mostly on content quality. And I think that they're making a lot of assumptions on content quality based on patterns within their crawl data. And so I find a lot of clients that get hit by these core updates, they have like a huge section of very thin content pages, or they have lots of duplicate content, or they have lots of crawl problems, internal crawl problems, that kind of thing. So if you can address best practices issues, and you can also make sure that the content on your site doesn't create any sort of replicated pattern of low quality or value, then I think you should be okay and fine,
I think one thing to remember too is that just because there's an update and just because you lose positions, it doesn't mean you've actually lost a position. It just means that things have. So how can I explain? So Wikipedia is one of the big winners from this recent update, right? So if I'm in a number one position and I go to number two, Wikipedia goes to number one. Well, let's just say Wikipedia has been in the number one position for the past 10 years. It doesn't mean necessarily that I've had an issue.
Yeah.
It's not me. It's the fact that Wikipedia, I was temporarily in the position where they should be, right? And that's a good way to look at it sometimes. And it's also real estate, right?
Yes.
YouTube key moments, right? We've seen where key moments have led to people scrolling down and reading what's in the video and everything else before they click on something, or maybe they don't click on something because they've already figured things out. People also seems to have risen from maybe mid-page or below the fold to like what would be the number one position or like the number 0 position, right?
Yeah.
Things like that as well. And then, Google is always testing, putting more Google products above the fold at the end of the day. So even if Ahrefs or another tool says that you're in number one or number two or number three, especially on the mobile device, that can be 2 or 3 scrolls down before you actually get to your listing.
I think that it's very difficult for business owners, and this is something I struggle with my clients. It's very difficult for business owners to remain focused on the bigger picture when it comes to KPIs versus like granular items that maybe drive the business the most, or they think drive the business the most. And I think that what you're talking about, Lauren, about like, how this is sort of a zero-sum game, and if you do poorly on a couple of results with an update, it may not mean that you're being really targeted. It's just that everybody around you is doing better, and I think that one way to pull yourself out of that kind of thought process is to then focus on like the aggregate KPIs instead of like the more granular defined ones. And by that I mean like, okay, like you can look at those ranking reports if you want, but also like look at, okay, your traffic, organic traffic in analytics, and your average impressions in Search Console, and your average position in Search Console, and the clicks in Search Console, and kind of like look at all of that in aggregate to know if everything looks like it's going down at the same time, if everything, is going south, then yeah, you've probably been targeted by an algorithm update, But if you're losing a few rankings here and there, even if those rankings are like your bread and butter traffic, it doesn't mean you're actually hit by anything. It just means that your competitors are doing better than you are, you know.
And you could be losing rankings based upon intent too, right? So you may be losing traffic, but it may not be traffic that's actually buying.
No,
it may not be traffic that's sticking around. It could be that you tried to rank something by doing a lot of content around a piece that really shouldn't be there in the first place, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely, yeah. And so I think that you really have to be mindful of what KPIs matter, and understand that these changes with the algorithms, they're not necessarily targeting you specifically. They may be just helping everyone else around you, you know. Yeah.
And wait till it's done. Like wait till everything's done, which is easier to say than to do because we've been in this for the middle of over a month now, right?
Well, wait for it to be done whenever they decide it's going to be done. Like that's what drives me a little nuts with this summer is that like, you know, they've kind of like stretched this out during the Core Web Vitals thing. And I've got clients now asking me questions like, well, you know, is this drop based on Core Web Vitals or is it based on this last core algorithm update? Or, you know, we saw on, you know, this website that there's an undocumented change, you know, an unconfirmed update. And it's like, man, I don't know. Like, I wish I had an answer for you because there's too many things happening all at once, you know? So, I mean, even if you go over to, I don't mean to mention another website, but if you go look at Barry's website, then you'll see there's a few updates listed that are unconfirmed, and you know those are it's incredibly frustrating because all of the measurement tools like Mozcast and SEMrush's tool, they're all showing that there's definitely a high volatility on certain dates. But then Google is like, no, we can't say anything one way or the other, you know? And it's like, well, clearly something's happening right now, you know? So it's difficult in a lot of ways to fix these problems for clients. But I think that as an SEO consultant, one of my main goals for every client is to kind of make them algorithm bulletproof, you know, and to make them, and to put them in a position where they're not playing this game anymore, where they're chasing the algorithm and they're going up and down with the algorithm, putting them in a position where the algorithm could never interpret them as low quality or could never kind of position them outside of their competitors in a negative way, you know.
Yep, I love that. I love that. And the thing I just tell everybody is like, listen, if you've gone up, if you've gone down, who knows how this is all gonna settle in the end, right? So just because you haven't done your Core Web Vitals and you've gone up, does not mean that Core Web Vitals is not important anymore because they're also important to things like conversion and experience and things like that, right? And then the same way too. So if someone's like, oh, we gotta get 100 links now because the site that went up has like more links than us. Like, whoa, there's a lot of spam going to the top right now. Like, so just wait a little bit. It's gonna go and it's gonna recalibrate. And just like when Google broke the index about 6 or 9 months ago, just seemed like a bunch of stuff just like bubbled up to the top, and they're like, oh, we don't know what happened, but we fixed it. So just keep an eye out. Don't go too crazy, and try not to lose much sleep right now. And it should settle soon. So then we'll have a better idea of where to go. And it's hard to track ranking because you search 1 minute and you might be in the number 3 position. The next minute you're in number 8. The next minute you're in number 2. Next minute it's a video on the top, right? And it's like, what's going on here? So, you know, one more question, and I think that will be it for the day.
Okay.
Grill Great, the company Grill Great asks, do you think MUM will significantly change the way that we perform SEO? MUM and then AI in general.
Oh, AI in general? Okay. Oh, MUM. Okay. So I'm familiar in some ways with that. So with AI and I'm not familiar with Mom, to be honest with you. But with AI and machine learning and all those sorts of things, yeah, I think it's already kind of changing the way that SEO works. I think that one of the main areas that has changed is the way that the search engines understand content. And I think that's changed a lot of the ways that we should focus on things like keyword analysis and content analysis and content optimization. I think that we need to focus less on, and I know a lot of SEOs have said this as well, but I've really kind of appreciated this recently. We need to focus less on keywords and more on topics and ideas that are related to the keywords. Most business owners already know their keywords. They're not even aware that they know their keywords. I'm sure that Grill Great knows exactly how all of their customers talk about their products already, and they're already familiar with the type of language that's used within their industry. And so, if they or any business could create content around those topics and ideas, the artificial intelligence and machine learning kind of algorithms are going to be able to analyze that content in a way that makes sense. And I think that that's kind of important to remember that the whole purpose of artificial intelligence is to mimic the human experience on the web and to mimic the human experience from content development standpoint. And so there is no real way to reverse engineer that or to understand it in a way. I see a lot of people talk about things like LSI keywords and all this crazy stuff. But none of that really, none of that drives to the heart of what AI is supposed to do. And there's no way you can sit here and predict the AI algorithm, because the whole point of it is that it's an intelligent algorithm. It would be sort of like predicting like what a Googler is thinking or what a human being is thinking or doing. You can't really do that. So instead, just focus on your customer base and your target audience and know how they talk and what are the things that they like to say and read about, and then create content around that and focus on query intent and user intent, and develop that base understanding of that content from that audience perspective. I think that's the best way to approach it.
One thing that I found very interesting about Google Mom, and I'm not an AI expert either, but it is a lot of the examples around Mom are visual examples, right? Hey Google, how much coffee fits in this Ahrefs mug, right? And then Google figured 12 ounces. Google's like, hey, 12 ounces. Well, that's an interesting query and answer. And then also a tool that Google's put out, I just dropped a link to it, Google Lens, does exactly that, right? You can take a picture of something, Google will tell you what it is. You can take a picture of a menu. Google will find reviews online of that item or maybe recipes and things along that nature. You can take a picture of a page of content in one language and Lens will translate it to another language. And these are all photos, right?
Yeah.
Which totally blows me away, especially after a year of working. Like QR codes are a thing again, right? So QR codes, a 30-year-old technology, basically went away, and then with the pandemic, it came back. Now you can go to a restaurant, instead of touching a menu that a bunch of people have touched and licked and stuff like that, you can take a picture of the QR code and get the menu directly on your phone. So this has become like
do people lick menus?
Well, they lick their hands when they're eating and you touch the menu.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah.
Maybe
yeah.
in KFC, yeah. Yeah, so all of that's come back. And then I was just thinking about this. I'm sure that the vast majority, probably in the 90% of content being discovered by Google, is visual, right? Because all social networks now are visual.
Yeah.
right? Instagram, Facebook, it's all visual. Photos are visual, photo uploads. Everyone's taking selfies. Everyone with a Droid device or whatever is storing their information in the cloud. So it's
Yeah.
either Google, Android, or it's iCloud trying to figure out what those photos are for you. And I'll even do things on my phone, like I got a picture of like my driver's license in case I ever need it right on my phone. So I'll just search for driver's license, and my driver's license photo will pop up. It totally blew me away. But just the understanding of things like places, items, what your shirt says. This shirt says T-shirt.
So I think that, okay, so let me, so you're mentioning like mom as being sort of like a visual recognition engine sort of thing. And I didn't realize that was even something that Google was doing. To me, if it doesn't involve HTML, it doesn't have any importance. But no, I mean, that was just kind of a joke. But I think the question, though, I think that Bill Gates brings up is very similar to our concerns a few years ago about voice search and about the role of virtual assistants with search, and I think that in some regard that has come true to light. I know that I use my Google Home all the time and ask questions, like what movie was this person in or something like that. I think that from the graphical kind of visual standpoint of that type of search, I think it's probably going to have probably a lot of interface with Google entities, probably.
Yep.
What we've talked about with voice search, for example, voice search was kind of all integrated to entities. And I think that if you look at this thing, this approach to visual search, it would make sense that they could use machine learning and AI to decode an image and say, okay, that is an image of a Ahrefs mug, and we already have an entity about that object. There it is, and we already have an entity about that object, and so we know within the entity placement that it's like an 8-ounce mug or something like that, and so I think that that's probably the way that SEO should approach it, is think about entity optimization, and think about how not only how you can build out that entity optimization, but then also how are you going to connect the dots between that visual representation and the entity that you built out, and I think that's really interesting. Like, I don't know how that would work specifically. I mean, I know that for a long time, Google has had that search by image feature, and they've had the visually similar images when you use search by image, which is remarkable in some ways. I use that a lot. I've used that a lot before, and I've noticed that has gotten better, and it has gotten better at handling the image in the way that you most would expect a search engine to handle the image. Like you can post an image of something, and if it is a product specific image, then it gives you a product specific result. You know what I'm saying? Like if there's a brand name on it or something like that, or
it integrates the schema data and the product and price and all of that.
Exactly.
Right?
But if you just take an image of like a duck, it just gives you ducks, and so it's kind of interesting, and it makes you wonder, like, maybe there is something to building out like a visual representation of the entity as you're making entity optimization. That would be. Well, I think that's the way you would want to approach that if you were going to,
Well, to connect the dots, this is what I was kind of thinking of as well, is that, like you had said earlier, that, hey, if you're using a lot of the same regurgitated content or the same content templates and it's stuff like that throughout your site, really thin, really poor content, you may see with these core updates. Thinking in the back of my head, how many sites use stock photos? Right? So stock imagery, the same image, or like if you're a marketplace and you're reselling things, are you utilizing your own
Product.
imagery, that's unique
Yeah.
product lifestyle imagery? You know, me and Joe chilling, drinking an AW root beer on the AW site, or just making your own, right? And if Google can, through the tool that you're talking about, it's been around forever, the ability to upload an image or show similar images. If they can do that, and then now with Mom, like, they should be able to say that, hey, like, here's 100 sites that are all using the same exact product image, right, for this root beer. And then here, I'll give Chris Jones a name drop here. So here's Parlor Root Beer, Chris Jones' new root beer brand, where it's a bunch of guys hanging out in Erie, Pennsylvania, drinking root beer, and making root beer floats. Which one's Google going to prefer at the end of the day, not only just from a relevancy aspect, but a quality perspective to go around with the rest of the site? Just like you don't want to have templated boilerplate content throughout your site, you probably don't want to have templated boilerplate imagery or videos or anything like that moving forward either.
But also think about, like, you know, the history of like an entity too. You know, like if you can think of like the term root beer, right? And this is something that I think, go back to Chris. One of those, I mean, if Chris Jones's root beer company wanted to do entity optimization for their root beer brand, I think one of the hurdles for them is going to be like competing with the established brands, right? So like when you think about root beer, you think about A&W, you think about all these other like long time root beer brands that have like established, like they have established entities, you know, and that's not to say that Chris Jones can't work some of his magic and pull off some big publicity thing, and so that now tomorrow everyone in the country knows about their root beer brand. I can totally see him, you know, doing that. But the established entity for that brand with A&W is something that I think bigger brands that have established presence are going to be able to easier association with entity optimization with that product category, you know, and get in there in that way, I think, you know.
Yeah, especially with things like interest trending, right? Like, so like if you search for socks, I believe Bombas shows up, even though there's a million sites out there that are like coolsocks.com, bestsocks.com, yada socks.com. It's the old example of you search for coffee, like you used to do a tilde before the keyword, and then Google would highlight all of the uses. So if you search for coffee, Starbucks did not have the word coffee in their title or their description, but the word Starbucks was bolded. Right? Because Google
because they associate Starbucks with coffee. So yeah, I think that's kind of like, you know, we talk about things like Mom, and you think about anything that has an entity kind of attached to it, you need to focus on establishing that entity. You know, if it's a product or a service or whatever, you need to establish yourself as that authority on that entity, you know, and try to make yourself an authoritative figure within that entity, you know, topic and range, you know.
100%. Speaking of entity building, we're going to have Jason Barnard on and next month, I believe, to talk about that. It's like all the guy does. So I'm excited about that.
He is pretty amazing. I've read his work, and I have actually forwarded some of his work on to clients. And he does some pretty interesting stuff with entity optimization and knowledge graph and whatnot. So that should be a good episode.
100%. Joe, we're at the hour and 10-minute mark. So I believe this is I know it goes by so quickly.
It goes by so fast. And Lauren, let's not make this a once in 10-year thing. Let's get together. I miss you, my friend. And so let's totally connect again. And you know, I really appreciate for you having me. And this has been great, you know. Thank you so much for having me here.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure. It's great to catch up, as always.
Definitely.
Can't wait to see each other in person again. Maybe in Vegas sometime.
Maybe next year somewhere. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Joe. I dropped your Twitter handle in here just to let everyone know for superior SEO audits.
That's it. Yep.
Superior. That's it. That's your title. You can check out Hall Analysis.
HallAnalysis.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at Joe Hall.
There's only one Joe Hall, so it's been great to have you, Joe.
Yeah, but there's only one.
There's only one of you.
There's only one of me. Yeah.
It's been a pleasure having you. I hope you have a really good weekend. It's been a pretty crazy week between the holiday and all of the work this week and all the updates. Yeah. So chill out. Maybe you should actually, before we go, I'm gonna give you a tip. When I used to work in an office, I had the idea once to lease plants. So you can lease plants. People will come and they'll bring you plants to put in your place. And then they'll come every month, spray the plants, maybe every week feed the plants, stuff like that. So look into it. I always recommend it to people.
Do they have a liability clause where if they come back like a month later and they're all dead? Like,
just replace them. We'll just
replace them? Oh my gosh. Wow. I guess I can write that off too as a tax deductible house plants.
There you go. There you go. All right.
I'll think about it.
Thanks again, Joe. Have a good weekend. It's great connecting. Thanks to all of you that have stuck around for today's episode, and all of you that are listening right now or listening in the future. This has been Lauren Baker and Joe Hall signing off. So have a good one.
Thanks a lot, Lauren.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Search Engine Journal Show. If you liked this episode, subscribe to our channel for so much more and click the notification bell so you don't miss a thing.